Welcome, everyone. I'm Xerxes Spencer, Manager of Fellowship Programs here at the National Endowment for Democracy. On behalf of NED's International Forum for Democratic Studies, I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's presentation, Social Media and Support for Free Expression and Democracy in Central Africa, featuring Reagan Fussell Democracy Fellow Ellie Smith. We're delighted to have with us as discussant today Pierre Tonchu, Assistant Program Officer for Central Africa here at the National Endowment for Democracy. As many of you may know, the Reagan Fussell Democracy Fellows Program is an international exchange program funded by the United States Congress to host some of the world's most dedicated democracy activists, scholars, and journalists who conduct independent research and outreach projects here at the NED. Now in our 15th year, we have hosted more than 250 fellows from over 90 countries since the program's founding in 2001. Within this remarkable group, our speaker today stands out for his unwavering commitment to freedom of expression and human rights in Central Africa. While many countries in Africa face restrictive media environments, Central Africa stands out as especially hostile to freedom of expression. The Republic of the Congo, Cameroon, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo in particular make great attempts to stifle the press and limit free speech. Despite such repression, social media is playing an increasingly important role in activists' attempt to combat the undemocratic tendencies of their country's leaders. In his presentation, Ellie will discuss ways in which journalists, bloggers, and activists are harnessing the power of social media to promote free speech and push for democratic change in their countries. Ellie is a Cameroonian journalist, reporter, and translator who has worked with a number of media outlets, including Télésud, France 24, and Radio France International. He has served most recently as director of the MNTV television station in Congo-Brazzaville, where he helped to promote free speech by providing a safe space for politicians and civil society activists to express their views. His work in support of freedom of expression and anti-corruption has earned him recognition as Best TV Reporter in Congo-Brazzaville in 2014, but it has also led to reprisals against him and his family. During his fellowship, he is exploring the influence of social media on the consolidation of free speech and democracy in Central Africa. Pierre is Assistant Program Officer for Central Africa at NED, in which capacity he develops country strategy and oversees a $2 million portfolio of grants to NGOs in Burundi, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and the DRC. He has previously worked at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the Corporate Council of Africa. We'll now turn the floor over to Ellie, who will speak for approximately 25 to 30 minutes, followed by Pierre, who will speak for about 8 to 10. For those of you on Twitter, you can follow this presentation and contribute to the conversation by using the hashtag NEDEvents or by following the forum at Think Democracy and the endowment at NE Democracy. If you haven't already done so, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. And finally, let me take this opportunity to thank the many staff involved in today's event, especially Research Associate Emily Milstein. Thank you. Ellie. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Before I could start, I want to have the speech. I think being here today, since the 19th of January this year, I am privileged to have been selected by the National Endowment for Democracy to be a research fellow. This opportunity has not only given me a respite from the unbearable pressure that I was receiving from both the governments of Congo and Cameroon, it has given me an opportunity to research and share my thoughts on the role that social media is already playing in the region. The cooperation of the governments in the sub-region in the area of repression has also inspired me to think of a way to encourage pro-democracy activists within the sub-region to also cooperate and share their experiences in the fight against dictatorship in a region that seems to be the hideout of the most repressive regimes. And that is partly the reason why today in this room you have Raymond Ndong Sima, who is, that's Mr. Raymond Ndong Sima. He is a former Prime Minister of the Republic of Gabon and a presidential candidate in August, in the forthcoming August presidential elections in Gabon. Before him, it was a group of opposition parties from the Republic of Congo who came here and met with different stakeholders in Washington, D.C. Very soon it will be a return of delegation from the Central African Republic, Chad, Rwanda, and Cameroon. That is also part of this fellowship. The National Endowment for Democracy, in my opinion, is a symbol of American democracy, that whatever its shortcomings remains a beacon of hope globally. I would like to use this unique occasion today to thank the entire Africa team, especially Pierre Tangchu, Rudy Masamba, Dave Peterson, and Kati Campo. Kati Campo, thank you very much for defending me last year. I will want to thank Sally Blair. I saw how troubled she was when, I think last or 3 weeks ago, a lawyer from Denis Sassou Nguesso's son wrote a letter here about libel, but she should not bother herself. I'm used to that. And then I would like to thank Mr. Spencer Zexis. Thank you very much for being so determined for getting me a lawyer in my asylum case. So thank you, Mr. Zexis, Mr. Spencer. I would also like to thank Ian Graham, Megan Carroll. You all are wonderful. Special thanks to Marlena and in particular to Emily Milstein. I have a memory of an elephant and the patience of a crocodile. But my parents call me the hare. But here I won't tell you the reason why. And if this presentation is what it is today, orderly and clean, it is not it is because of one person, Emily. And Emily, thank you very much for all what you've done and what you're doing. When I came here on the 19th of January, it was very cold that day. And I cannot forget, the person who came to receive me at the airport was Marlena. And I had nothing. And Marlena gave me $20. And when I had some money, I wanted to refund her money back. And Marlena told me that no, it was just a gift. And I thought that distinctive generosity of Marlena, I want to tell her thank you, even though she's not here today. So she is, right. I'm sorry, my visibility. Oh, hi. Okay. So those, as we say in French, the petites choses, those little things that one seldom forgets. So thank you very much once again. As you're all here today is to talk about social media and support for free speech and democracy in Central Africa. And as you will see, we are going to focus on the countries that are members of the economic community of Central African states. There are 11, and you have them there. There is no need to name them, but we are going to focus on 2 countries. That is Cameroon and the Republic of Congo. The state of freedom of expression in Central Africa. Out of the 12 countries that make up that are a member of the economic community of Central African state, 11 are intolerant to free speech. Only 1, that is Sao Tome and Principe, has a liberal freedom of expression policies. I don't know whether it's because it is extra-continental, that's one of the reasons, but then I think others will have time to study about that. Then social media is important in the promotion of free speech in the region, because there you have direct and indirect intimidation of journalists and activists is very common. And you also have censorship there is rampant, either by the state or self-censorship. Now, you may have asked the question why we are why bringing this topic of the links between the traditional media and social media. I think both work hand in hand. But while the use of social media expanding, traditional media such as radio still plays a preponderant role. And the radio is widely used for those who know Africa very well in rural areas. And social media also, even though it is expanding, has also some limitation. One of the limitations is that those who are financially disadvantaged may not have the accessibility. And another handicap to social media is illiteracy, which limits people's access to social media, hence the enduring appeal of radio and television. You also have traditional media and social media, they work in tandem. When a story can be broadcast or used on standard media, they are shared on social media. The example is what you have there. There's a case in Cameroon currently where transfusion of HIV infected blood to children in a hospital run by Chantal Biya Foundation in Yaoundé were publicized, not on the traditional media. It was broadcast via the social media. And for those who do not know who Chantal Biya is, she is the wife of the president of Cameroon. And we have brought in this map about Central Africa, about West Africa. That is a comparative map. Most governments in West Africa are relatively tolerant of free speech. We have the exceptional cases are those of Togo, Mauritania, Niger, the Gambia, who are more restrictive in free speech. Here, as you see there, you have three individuals as the use of social media by civil society. As we have seen, the theme is the role of social media in promotion of free speech and democracy. And while social media cannot replace on-the-ground actors, it can act as an auxiliary to pro-democracy activists. I know there are some people after the Arab Spring, some people think that social media doesn't have a great role. It still has a grand role to play, especially when you have actors on the ground. And social media help bring important issues to the public view, such as the failure of utility companies to provide adequate services. Social media can be used to mobilize people around a particular cause, such as health, education, or politics. And that's the reason why I've brought in these three people you see here. We begin with this the lady, Madam Manga Makanga. She's a member of a social group in Gabon called Infokingele. She uses Facebook. She's not a founder but a member. Why did I bring her there? It's simply because we have a region where we have a lot of men dominating, but when we have a lady who is pushful and then an active member, we think we can bring her on it. And Infokingele informs people in Gabon on what is happening. For example, Gabon, I think the Prime Minister of Gabon is here. He knows very well what happens there. So when elections want to happen, we have problems of ritual killings where albino children are sometimes sacrificed thinking that they have some type of supernatural power. And then the social media teaches people that it is not an albino child is important like a non-albino child. Then in the middle, you have the founder of Brazil News. Brazil News is the most popular social media platform in Congo. They have blogs and they have Facebook, and they were instrumental in the presidential elections in Congo. And then you have Madam Rebecca Tickle. She's British, but she's an activist based in the Central African Republic. She uses blogs. They have a network in Bangui, and they played an important role for the first time, I think, since 1979. Elections that took place in Bangui, the post-electoral violence never existed simply because they use their social media application, WhatsApp and Facebook, to publish results which reflected that of the National Electoral Commission. And social media as a means of education. I've decided here to have two examples. In countries with many ethnic groups such as Cameroon and the DRC, that is Democratic Republic of Congo, social media can unify people around similar goals. This can create bridges between people from different communities and contribute to national unity. And social media has been used to teach people about health issues such as hygiene, preventing HIV/AIDS and other STDs. Well, as far as STDs is concerned, the social media in Cameroon, it was used because when a campaign to fight against poliomyelitis was launched in Pakistan, there was a rumor in Pakistan that the campaign was launched by the American CIA to reduce the population of Pakistan. And that rumor spread to Africa, in northern Nigeria as well, and even in Cameroon. And the government decided to use social media to inform women and children that, contrary to the rumor that came from Pakistan and Nigeria, it was important to vaccinate your child against poliomyelitis. And we also have the case in Congo whereby many people refuse to take vaccine, claiming that the vaccine are the urine, of the president of the Congo. Since everybody hates him, nobody wants to take the vaccine. So social media can be used as an educative tool. It's not just to overthrow governments. It can also be used in diverse countries, as we gave the council the case of the DRC. In DRC, for example, when the Kabila came to power in 1997, many people were surprised because most people who came to power they spoke Swahili, whereas in Kinshasa, we speak Lingala, the West. But had it been social media was there, and I think it's doing that role today, people now understood that in the DRC, you don't only need to speak Lingala or Chiluba, you can speak Kiswahili as well. And in the case of Cameroon, you have these Scribbles from the Den. It's the most popular blog there, explaining the bicultural heritage of Cameroon. As most of you may know, the majority speaks French, but there is a large English-speaking population. And there, the Scribble from the Den, run by Dibusi Tande, tries to educate people on the importance of Anglophone Cameroon and their history. Then you have also social media. It's not only used, as you see, by pro-democracy activists, even those who are in power. And the paradox is that some of them don't like free speech, but they use social media. One of them is the man there, Mr. Paul Kagame. Democratically and human rights-wise, he's worst, but as far as economy is concerned, he's very good, and also the use of social media. And then in the middle, you have Pastor Pierre Nkurunziza, who is the president of Burundi. He also uses social media, especially Facebook and Twitter. And you have Gabon, the president of Gabon, Omar Bongo. No, or not Omar Bongo. Well, it is a republic, but that has a hallmark of a monarchy. But the father died, he took over, and he also uses social media as well. Then social media used in politics. So we have seen that those in power do use it, and also those in the opposition. Those are two cases. You have social media has been used in the presidential and other political campaigns in Gabon, in the DRC, in the Republic of Congo. Presidential candidates, especially those of the opposition, have effectively used social media as campaign tools. When much of a country's media is state-owned, social media is a way to circumvent the monopoly by allowing opposition candidates to get their messages to the public. There you have Mr. Jean Ping, Mr. Ndong Sima. I'm sorry, I did not use yours, but Jean Ping. He was he was the former foreign minister of Gabon. He's a presidential candidate using it. And there you also have Andre Okombi Salisa, a presidential candidate in the elections in Congo Brazzaville. And then in the DRC, even though we don't have any snapshot of that, we have a social media platform called Code 243, which is very popular and have been mobilizing people against the plan of Mr. Kabila Kabange to extend his mandate in power. And we have challenges faced by media and free speech advocates. In sub-Saharan Africa, Central Africa stands out as being particularly hostile to journalists and advocates of free speech. Many journalists and free speech activists have been threatened, arrested, or even killed for their reporting. There you have, on the end, Robert Chawami. He's from the DRC. I think Reporters Without Borders reported extensively on his assassination. In the middle is Guy Milex Mbonzi. He is not dead, but alive, but he has been arrested on several occasions. His newspaper banned. And here we have Bob Rukurika from Burundi. He was arrested recently, and due to the pressure, especially from social media, he has been freed. We have also here the challenges faced by the media and free speech advocate. Journalists can be arrested indiscriminately for reporting. Example is that of Ahmed Baba, a journalist for Radio France International, who has been arrested under Cameroon's terrorism law for reporting on Boko Haram and has been in prison for 10 months. And also, families and friends of journalists are targeted as payback for journalists' independent reporting. And another challenge faced by the by journalists there and social media activists, lack of funding is a persistent problem for independent media houses and journalists. You also have the problem faced in that region, that of censorship and self-censorship. In light of the tough draconian press law that exists in many Central African countries, censorship, including self-censorship, is prevalent. Examples include Angola. The Angolan president Dos Santos is trying to reintroduce a law that will restrict and regulate the social media. Cameroon has passed two restrictive laws. The first one was in 2010 and the second one in 2014. The 2014 one is very repressive. It wants people to report their sources. When you fail to do it, you will be arrested or banned from the profession. We have three journalists reported by Reporters Without Borders that they are today banned from doing reporting work. And you also have another problem is sponsorship. Many journalists self-censor in order to receive payment or funding for their work. Self-censorship occurs throughout Central Africa. And here we are going to talk the case study in the Republic of Congo. You may have asked the question, why have I decided to choose Congo? It's for two reasons. First, this is where, when I left France and I came back to Africa, it's where I think professionally I did Balsam very well. And it's also where I saw the importance of social media. Seeing is believing. And there, it is also a country that people always confuse Congo with the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the bigger Congo. It's the case of Lebanon and Syria. And here, that's the reason why I think it's an opportunity to talk about what is going on in the Republic of Congo. The Congolese government has passed draconian press laws. Journalists have used social media outlets to circumvent those laws, and social media has also been used to expose corruption because Congo is very corrupt. I think with time we are going to give you examples of the corruption that exists in Congo. Just two slides there. You have this one, we say the Congo is not the property of Ngeso. Ngeso is the president of Congo since 1979. I think had a hiatus between 1992 and 1997. And that it was the largest government rally that took place in Congo. And it was through the mobilization of social media that they mobilized 50,000 people or more in Brazzaville against the plan of Sassou Nguesso to elongate his tenure in power. But he used force, and he's still there in power. Then you also have another very extraordinary case. I think he is the only person in Central Africa that I know that has become what he is today, the main challenger of Denis Sassou Nguesso. His name is Jean-Marie Michel Umokoko, because he focused his campaign using only social media. And the person or the groups of persons who did his campaign are this social media platform called Brazza News. So if in the United States they have Barack Obama or Howard Dean, but in Congo we have General Mokoko, who used social media to become what he is today. And the case study of Congo continues. The country's election in March 2016 was marred by violence and fraud. Activists used social media to expose electoral fraud by the government. This was done by broadcasting photos of ballots on social media so people could see that Nguesso hadn't in fact won the election, as the government had claimed. Social media was used to expose post-election violence, which had been organized by the government. There you have an example of ID cards. In Africa, since we have porous borders, the identification of people are very difficult. There, when elections were about to take place in Congo, they decided to establish Congolese national identity cards to foreigners, Cameroonians, people from the DRC, in order for them to vote. And it was through social media that it was exposed. The first thing. And the second thing that social media did was that since the social media was mindful that the government of Congo was to organize a general blackout, they used what is called fire chat. Fire chat is a kind of it creates a kind of small short range transmitter. It merged with others, and today everybody knows that Denis Sassou Nguesso did not win the election. He stole the victory of that country. And another thing that social media did in Congo, which is extraordinary, is that when the government decided to intimidate, use violence after the elections, it was only the social media who were there to report about it, like what is happening in the Pool region. And in the Pool region today, you know that there is what is going on, which is a kind of genocide going on. It is not because when you decide to attack a particular group of persons based on their religion or their race, I think, and it is the social media that decided to do the exposition. So the social media has really been instrumental in exposing the electoral violence in Congo. And that's why today in Congo, they call the president of Congo Mr. 8%. Because in fact, he just recorded 8%. Anyway, it was 79% of the express electoral balloting, but he's still the president. So thanks to social media, we all know today that we can call him is an electoral fraud. Then we have here the recommendation. After all those we've said, we have the recommendation to the international community. The international community must prioritize and provide increased funding for free press and freedom of speech in Central Africa. Increased funding should go to Journalism Union. Provide increased funding to allow individual media outlets to develop their social media activities. And as far as regional bodies are concerned, such as the Economic Community of Central African States, they should train activists and social society organization and civil society organizations to maintain website, effectively and responsibly use different social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp. When I mean here responsibly, because there are people there, for example, in Burundi, the government of Burundi has a social website, a CNDD, but it's used to promote division between the Hutus and the Tutsis, like what happened in Rwanda. So that's why we say they should encourage them to use it responsibly, to develop a plan to target a particular audience. You cannot just address everybody. You need to have a particular target in order to have result. And the regional bodies such as ECAS must encourage political parties to maintain websites, train them to utilize social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp. And recommendation to local civil society organizations, journalists, and media houses for both print and electronic media must maintain website, learn to use social media effectively and also responsibly. Create and strengthen federation or association for journalists who use social media. Develop clear-cut objectives and goals for activists using social media. To teach local government about the importance of having well-trained journalists and social media activists to help those in power to see that free speech can be an advantage. I think government officials should understand that social media is not an adversary. Can be considered as an ally. And this recommendation now is targeted to local and national governments. Uphold the rights of journalists and media outlets to equal protection under the law and end sporadic or selective enforcement of the laws. This includes respecting and upholding existing libel laws. And government must use social media responsibly. And to round off our presentation today, I'm dedicating this to my colleagues, Bruno Jacques Osebi. He was the friend. I knew him when we were in France before he decided to come to Congo. And in the middle, we have Germain Cyril Ngota. And also we have another Ghislain Simplice Onguya. Bruno Osebi is painful. He died in a very atrocious manner, killed by the government of Congo. I will not spare you of it, but because he was carrying out investigative reporting. And one day they came and blocked his house, poured fuel around it, and set it ablaze. His wife and 2 children died, got burned. He did not die. He did not die immediately. They took him to the hospital, and it's at the Brazzaville military hospital that Ongoya was killed by the government of Denis Sassou Nguesso. Yeah. And to add salt to the injury, when Reporters Without Borders decided or wanted to carry out an investigation, what the government of Congo did was to order bulldozers to go and bulldoze his house in order that they should not have any trace of what happened. So Bruno Sebi today, nobody knows what. And in Congo, it's even banned to talk about Bruno Sebi. And the other case is Ghislain. Ghislain also got killed the same way, simply because he was carrying out investigative reporting. His newspaper is called Tam Tam d'Afrique. It is still existing, but it has been banned. Bruno Sebi's paper is called Observateur. It's existing. It has not yet been banned. And then in the middle, you have Germain Cyril Ngota. He was arrested because he was carrying out investigative report on the Minister of Justice. He was arrested, put in jail, killed in the jails of Cameroon, and then another insult to the injury in order to maybe denigrate him. They said he died of HIV/AIDS. And thanks to social media, his medical reports were online and showed that Mr. Ngota had no HIV/AIDS. So you see, in that region, there are many people, many of them like that, who have been killed in Congo. And in Congo, sometimes people focus very much on Eritrea. But Congo, I can assure you, is worse than Eritrea. And in the way they treat journalists, and with the way they are treating pro-democracy activists. You can see that even today you have General Mokoko that you saw a while ago. I think he's going to be arrested today. And that's the reason why I decided to dedicate this presentation today to all those in the Central African sub-region who are victims of the draconian press laws and also the dictators that are there. But I also think the dictators, they should understand that social media can also be used for their own advantage and also for the advantage of the sub-region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellie, for that very insightful overview of the state of freedom of expression in Central Africa, with the particular focus on the role that social media is playing. And we know from our experience working with the Committee to Protect Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, and yourself, that you too have faced a number of challenges as a result of your work in this field. And that has brought you here to be with us today, and we are honored to be supporting you. Let me turn now to Pierre to share his thoughts on this topic. Pierre.
Thank you, Xerxes. I would first like to congratulate Eli on his presentation and the amazing work that he did here as a Reagan Purcell Fellow at the NED. Really, congratulations, Eli. And I will be brief. I won't take too much time. No one goes to a concert to see the backup dancers doing their thing. It's all about the show, the star of the show. Eli did do a good job, but allow me to set the scene a bit further. Bad governance is not a new phenomenon in Central Africa. As a matter of fact, the climate in the sub-region is one of democratic stagnation. The climate right now, when you look at some of the 5 longest non-monarchs rulers in the world, 4 of them are from Africa, and 3 out of the 4 are from Central Africa. Earlier this year in Equatorial Guinea, President Obiang was reelected to further his 36 years in power during what were really dubious elections. In Angola, many agree that President Dos Santos is not totally honest about his plea to leave power in 2018 when the elections are supposed to happen in 2017. And President Kabila in the DRC, this mammoth of a country, there's really popular belief that the president is not listening to local and international calls for what would be the country's first democratic transition. Instead, he's continuing steadfast with his strategy of glissement, as he calls it, as people call it, allowing him to stay in power for as long as possible. In Burundi, President Nkurunziza, Eli spoke a little bit about him, He has also ignored the deep political, social, and economic crisis that he plunged his country into with running for a third term and ultimately getting that third term. So you get where I'm going with this. It goes without saying that the region is riddled with such examples of democratic challenges. Now, amongst all those challenges, the population really finds its voice drowned in a sea of fraudulent elections and corrupted state institutions. But those two topics are for another day. While this event title suggests that we will only talk about one category of the media, I think Eli's correlation between the traditional and social media is an important one to make. Let's not forget that the African people have a strong, proud history of resisting oppression as they demonstrated during colonial times. But it has to be there that since then, since gaining independence, local despotism and illiberality really have both stunted this impetus from the African population. This is better illustrated, like Eli put it, by the current state of the traditional media in the Central Africa sub-region. By buying up news outlets, forbidding or co-opting private media practitioners, and censoring independent journalists, some governments in the sub-region have pulled out an important thread of the community's social fabrics. And they have muzzled pretty much an important voice, an important mouthpiece of popular expression. Enter social media, a lifeline to traditional media and to the people for them to be able to voice their concern and push back against some of these repressive living conditions they've had to endure. Thus continuing, as I said, a strong and proud tradition of rising up against social inequality and political alienation. In Burundi, for example, amongst the shutting down of all traditional outlets by the government early last year, a collective of bloggers and journalists came together to fill in the information void and create what is called SOS Media Burundi. Those of you who follow Burundi have probably heard of it. They created SOS Media Burundi to keep informing the local and international communities of what is happening in the country. In a country where 90% of the population rely on radio as a source of information, SOS Media Burundi played a much needed role to keep Burundians appraised on development in a crisis that concerned them. Hearing Eli's point about the importance of social media to bring issues to the public view, I would even argue that social media not only brings issues, but it brings facts ahead of issues to the people. I'm reminded of a country which shall remain nameless that I traveled to, where the national newspaper was printed and distributed in the capital, and it would take 2 days, 2 entire days, for that newspaper to reach the most remote areas, the most remote provinces. For those of you who follow basketball, I don't know how you would feel if you had to wait 2 days to hear that Golden State didn't win yesterday. I don't know. So while visiting other partners in those areas, I saw that locals would get the information through Facebook, through activists on Facebook. And thanks to Facebook Zero, they did not have to pay for an internet connection fee, and all they needed was a half-decent smartphone. It's simple. These people relied on social media for information they did not get or would get 2 days later through the printed press. Using Burundi again as an example, I'd like to point out a drawback to social media, if I could. Because it is not regulated, information shared on social media is not always verified. And very much often, rumors can quickly become facts. Early in the days of the political crisis in Burundi, many on Twitter, WhatsApp, and other social media websites declared an attempted coup a success. There was even a Facebook page of General Niyombare, who was the coup leader at the time, calling him President Niyombare. In the end, the coup failed and the plotters had to leave the country. So I encourage Eli and others, taking to this online frontier to continue working towards properly vetting their posting and avoid mass misinformation. Not that you've done that, Eli. I'm just encouraging you towards that option. To reinforce Eli's point about the government and media collaboration, it is also important to say that during a meeting early this year in Brussels between the Burundian National Council for Communications and representative of the exiled media. They were able to come up with some resolution to a few issues, and a few arrest warrants against journalists were lifted, and both sides made commitment to improve relations. So that is good to see. It also shows that the government in itself is doing what it can to resolve the state of traditional media in its country. Going back to Eli's recommendation that we must prioritize and provide increased funding for free press and freedom of speech in Central Africa, I will pose that we even go deeper than that and encourage the strengthening of pro-media policy. How do you mobilize other sectors of society to also support media policy development in those countries? Businesses, healthcare providers, legal practitioners, and so forth, all have a strong interest in having a strong independent media. They need the media to push information out to the population. They need the media to keep the government interlocutors honest, to better the investment environment. These are all things that will be beneficial to both sides. These lobbies are often missing at the table, even though their political influence can lead to a thriving media, especially the business community. How do you get them involved? I think this is probably a question better asked to our Center for Media and Center for International and Media Assistance. If they're in attendance, I would love to hear their answer to that. To continue, I would say that the endowment has made independent media one of its priorities. As a matter of fact, in the Central Africa region, we have spent almost $1.7 million in support of freedom of information and media development. Out of the 109 grants in our region, 33 are inclined towards the media. Throughout the region, our partners are looking for new mediums to spread information by creating social media apps. They're training traditional and citizen journalists in ethical reporting. They're creating community radios in some of the more marginalized areas of their countries. And they're even engaging with state regulatory institutions to provide better access to media, better access to information, rather, and influence pro-media policymaking. In conclusion, independent media is one of a cornerstone of a democracy. We can see it here in the U.S. For some of the things that independent media is able to say sometimes quite alarming. The endowment is thus dedicated to support those like Eli who are committed to provide independent and verified information to the population of Central Africa. And we're excited about his work, really, and we wait to see it pay dividend, not only for the people of Central Africa, but hopefully for the people of this great, great continent. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre, for providing that comparative context and sharing with us the role of the NED and the grant-making program in your region. We now have time for questions from the audience and discussion with Ellie and Pierre. I thought I would begin with a couple of quick questions for Ellie, if I may. You certainly pointed out, Ellie, the power of social media to play an influential role, but I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how pervasive social media actually is. My sense is it's not especially pervasive. Radio is much more pervasive. So to what extent do ordinary people have access to the tools they would need, the mobile phones, the computers, to actually avail of all the terrific things that the civil society leaders and others are doing on social media? And my other question was, why did you choose to compare it only with West Africa and not with Southern Africa or East Africa?
Okay, I think I will start with the second question. The reason why I decided to compare Central with West Africa is simply because of the similarity of those regions. West Africa is majority French-speaking, though you have some pockets of English-speaking countries and Lusophone-speaking country, and it's the same mix that you have in Central Africa. And the strange thing is, why should West Africa do well and Central Africa fare worse as it is today. That's the reason why I decided to bring it. And on the other hand, also to show that, contrary to what many people do think, democracy is a universal value, because there are some people in Africa and even in Western world who think that no, you see, democracy cannot work there, but it works in some West African countries. It has limitations, but why doesn't it work in Central Africa? That's why I decided to bring up the. And now,
But how does it compare with the other parts of Africa?
the other parts of, why didn't I use, for example,
Southern or
Southern Africa? Well, I didn't use Southern Africa because the similarity between Southern Africa and Central Africa is very limited. But you may say, okay, there are some countries in that straddle Central and West and Southern Africa, like Angola, like in the DRC, because DRC is part of the SADC. But when you look at the historic similarities, they are very different. For example, when you are in Zambia, for example, Zambia, the people of northern Zambia and the southern DRC, they speak the same languages, but the culture is different because of the colonial heritage has something very preponderant in the way things happen in those different regions. And now, on the use of social media, the limitation of social media, for example, that it is widely used in urban areas. That's the reason in urban area, and given that most often the population in this Central African sub-region is mostly in urban areas. For example, in Congo, we take 60% of the population are in the urban areas, and that's the reason why there's a high use of social media in urban areas. But radio, or the standard media, still has a role to play because they are widely used in the rural areas. As I said there in the presentation, you have the problem of education that limits sometimes the access to the use of social media. There's also a problem of money. Because the government, they also becoming much more intelligent. What they are doing is that they try to increase the fees to have social media, so to limit accessibility. I hope I've responded to your questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we have a number of hands up, starting with Carl Gershman, president of NED. It's to your left. It's behind you.
Oh, thank you. Ellie, could you explain why you didn't use, you made the distinction between Central Africa and West Africa or some of the other regions, but especially looking at Central Africa and West Africa, which has so many similar characteristics, what are the reasons that you have more freedom of expression in West Africa than in Central Africa? What are the factors? I thought it might have to do with the colonial experience, but you're basically saying that the history is fairly similar. So what are the factors that account for the difference?
Okay. The one factor is that in West Africa, they have a very good civil society organization. And the governments of West Africa, in spite of the fact that some of them are dictatorial, they are somehow, given the history, much more conciliatory. For example, when you go in a country like Senegal, historically, it is a country that is dialogue that exists. Even in Nigeria, even in the worst moment of the Abacha regime, they have a very good civil society organization. They have very good press. Whereas in Central Africa, the civil society organization doesn't even exist because of the history of the people itself. I think that's the reason why when you have a good civil society organization, when you have good press, I think those are prerequisites to encourage democracy or free speech to exist, like we have the case of Burkina Faso, for example. But when you come to Central Africa, the only country that is even trying to have a good civil society organization is the DRC. Cameroon also to a certain level, but in Gabon, in Congo, in Equatorial Guinea, it doesn't exist.
Okay, so let's take those two questions and we'll move on to this side. If you could introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Sure.
Please.
Josh McLeader from USAID. First, thank you very much for your brave work and for your presentation.
Thank you.
And for telling us about your colleagues as well who died in the line of duty. First, I thank you for laying out the opportunities that social media lays out for activists and journalists who may not ordinarily find a voice offline. However, there's always a complication with social media in the fact that it's not, anyone can do it, and you have opportunities for dangerous speech, hate speech, divisive speech, misinformation, disinformation, as was mentioned on the panel, both by state actors and non-state actors. So this floods the social media messages as well. It can confuse populations, and it also may drown out those good voices that you are talking about here. So how do you work in that landscape? Because this is a troubling problem everywhere in the world.
Can I? Yeah.
Let's get the second question.
second question,
Is that
yes.
okay?
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Morgan, and I run the blog Confused Eagle, which covers U.S. policy towards Africa. And I've actually have documented some of the problems that people like LA have had in Africa. There's a couple quick questions I have. One, we hear about giving social media the equipment, the computers and the phones and everything. The other side of the coin is, how about training the lawyers to actually be able to defend the lawyers? Because if the state is actually willing to use the social media outlets to squash the information, we have to train the lawyers also to defend against this and actually prevent convictions from taking place. And my second question is, we always talk about, we hear about the elites having power. They like to control the information. They hate what they cannot control. As we saw what happened in Brazzaville with the elections, in order to keep the votes from being counted, they actually shut down the phone grid. The problem is, you can have all the social media you want, but if the government's willing to throw the switch whenever they feel like it, how do you give social media other networks to actually get the message out?
Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I would want to. Okay. The problem on social media, it is true that on social media, that's why I'm encouraging the governments and organizations to use it responsibly. It is true on social media. We have seen it in Africa. People use it for hate speech. People use it for defamation. Sometimes people use it even anyway. But now the thing is to organize people, organize a group. That's the reason why I'm encouraging that the social media should not be encouraged to be used by individuals. It's good to be used on a group basis and in tandem with standard medias. Because in the standard media, with standard media, they have some ethics, and you will really know who does what. But the problem with most social media activists currently is that they are loners and they can easily hide themselves. But if there is funding for media, standard media, to have a wing of social media, I think it's going to fight this propagation of falsehood, defamation, or hate speeches. Especially even on the government side, we've seen, for example, in Burundi, the CNDD, the government in power, how they are using social media negatively. But if there are fundings, we have good journalism union that encourages standard media to develop the social media aspect. I think it's going to be a tool to try to water down the use of social media negatively. But honestly, it is difficult. It's very difficult. And to respond to, I think I've responded, my answer is clear. I don't know if, good. And now to respond to the question of Scott, to train the lawyers how to defend, it's good, but the problem is that in most of those countries, you don't have laws, specific laws. The only countries that are having, for example, in Cameroon, they have a law on social media, 2 laws, and that's where we need to have lawyers to train, to adapt, and know how to defend. And I think Angola, the government is trying to bring it up, and because social media is something like very new, and that's the reason why, if you look at it properly, most governments are losing that war, but they are learning fast to adapt. For example, like in the case of Congo, they are learning first. They have what they call online warriors, those who go online to demystify, to attack pro-democracy activists. And on the second aspect of the question, how, when the government decides, like what happened in Congo, for a total blackout, there is always a way to to circumvent the law, for using what they call a fire chart. That's what media activists in Congo did, because the rumors were there. They knew that it's going to happen. I think 3 weeks before the elections, they sent messages on Facebook asking people to download the social media apps. And also another thing is, since we have countries that have contiguous to other countries, they ask people to buy SIM cards of neighboring countries like that of Angola or that of the DRC, which means that if it is not operating in Congo, you can use that of Angola. And if you're in the north of Congo, you can use the SIM cards of the Republic of Cameroon or that of, and that is, those are the stratagem used to circumvent those strategies of blackout. But FireChat is very effective. We've seen it in Congo.
Okay, we have a question here in the front behind Sally. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, hi. My name is Telamem Nyabe. I'm from Congo Brazzaville, and I'm the coordinator for the National Congress for Democracy, which is an organization, a platform that fights for democracy in Congo. In fact, I wanted to respond to one of the questions that the director asked, and I think Eli touched part of the answer. The question was that why democracy, social media, was more stronger in West Africa than it is in Central Africa. I think the element that we need to add from that question is that all these African countries in in Central Africa are all extremely rich. If you look at, for instance, the country Congo-Kinshasa, Congo-Brazzaville, Gabon, Congo-Brazzaville is the fourth oil producing country in Africa. Equatorial Guinea is the third oil producing country in Africa. Congo-Kinshasa is extremely rich. And all of these countries except Central Africa, Equatorial Guinea, they all colonized by the French. The economy of France is not sustainable without African countries. And that's why you see that in those countries, development has not taken place because, again, the French have fought everything possible to place puppets within those countries that are there to sustain the interest of France and not the interest of the people. So, question to you, Eli, and I want to make that distinction. How do you think, what do you think we can do? Because even the media, the social media, are controlled in some ways by the government. We've seen an example in Congo-Brazzaville when the president for 4 days suspended all media. You know, there's no way to get access. How really can we find a way, which other ways we can find to give something, tools to these young countries that need democracy and are dying for democracy? And again, one last thing that I want to add is, again, there's a system of check and balance. In this country, the media or mass media is an extremely important element of the system of check and balance. You remember that if you go back to Nixon time, one of the first that was able to fight against Nixon was the media. The Washington Post published so many different things, but in most of these countries in Africa, the media are under one person. So president has the economic power, the executive, the judiciary, and the legislative, and also the mass media. So that's, just want to add that.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me for being so long.
Did you want to respond or to his question?
Yes. How do we do to empower the social media or the media in general? You know? Well, the only thing is, as I was saying, is to have some fundings to help those existing media to consolidate them. It is not as if there are no media that exist in there. There are, but they have to be autonomous financially. That's one of the great things. Because if you are not, if you are not paid regularly, if you are not paid regularly, you are not independent. Because they say commonly, he who pays the piper dictates the tune. And the problem in that country, in that part of the Central African region, is that, as you rightly said, the government is rich, and the government has the power to control the mainstream media. But now, to circumvent it is to have funding to help to have independent media and well-trained journalists as well. Because if you are not well-trained, I think it's going to be a problem. And also to train them how to use social media. I think that is the only way to do it. There is no magic wand.
Mm-hmm.
Just about your second point, I think you mentioned something that was really important, and I try to talk about it. I think we need to engage the business community a little bit more. You've talked about how rich those countries are. When the government of the DRC shut down the ICT infrastructure in January 2015, when they were having protests, uh, companies lost millions of dollars, because they need that ICT infrastructure to be able to function. These are things as well. We need to be able to put pressure on the internet providers, on the cell phone providers, to stop being instrumentalized by those governments to do their bidding, because the businesses are losing money and the population is suffering from that. So if we're able to put that type of pressure and show them that this is also in your interest, I mean that's one way as well that we can touch up on that issue. But I just wanted to push that point forward.
Okay. We have a question here in front, on my left, and then on my right, and then Eric Robinson.
Thank you. My name is Ajong Bamda. I am from Cameroon and I run panafricanvisions.com. And thank you, Eli, for the good presentation when he had his issues in Congo. I was based in the United States. He was in Cameroon, but we were able to do an interview to shed light on some of the human rights abuses that he suffered in the Congo. And a challenge to Pierre as well. I hope before Eli leaves here, you can help provide him with funding so that maybe he can come out with, I don't know if it's a guide on how people can use social media, because it might end up being a loose cannon. You get all of this information coming from different sources and people posting it for specific agendas. So when you get all of this conflicting information to the user, how do you know what is right and what is wrong? My fear is that social media does not end up creating the kind of situation where we had in Rwanda with Radio Milkolen. Yes. So eventually, I hope that the National Endowment for Democracy can keep up with its good work and possibly, encourage you to do some more research and works on how to enlighten people on responsible usage of social media. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that suggestion. Do you want to say a word about your fellowship product? I know you were writing your memoirs about your experiences as a journalist. Do you want to say just a brief word about that, and then we can go to the next question?
Yes, as Zexis rightly said, I'm writing my experience in Congo because I spent 4 years in Congo. And I think that I want people to know the experience that I had there, which is to serve like a guide as well, what I went through, and that those who are going to come to Congo one day should know how to navigate in the Congolese waters. And then it is a good idea to write about a guide. It's true. On social media, you have a number of things coming in. But the problem now is that people know credible sources, because if you have published one thing once, twice, people will now know that this source is not credible. So you will die of your own poison. I think the other thing is we have to encourage, like about the funding aspect of it, encourage the standard media, radio, that when you have a radio station like I think they do it in the DRC, Radio Okapi, which has a very good website and good Facebook page. I think that's an example. I think it's sponsored by the United Nations. I think those type of initiatives should be extended to other countries, that the standard media and the new media should move in tandem.
Just also to kind of answer my friend from Cameroon, that is actually something that we are trying to do, because I don't know if you remember when you were young, you were prone to say or do a lot of foolish things. And really, it is the youth most often than not that use social media and that are prone to being influenced or prone to share some of the messaging that is, not correct. And one thing that we're doing, we are supporting an organization in Douala called El Monde Avenir, which is actually teaching the youth how to use the social media, from signing up for Facebook or WhatsApp to actually what is the content of what you're supposed to be putting in there. If you're expressing yourself, you're not supposed to express yourself in a disrespectful way or calling for violence or this type of thing. So that is something that we're actually working on. We're also working with another group called ACIDI, very quickly. They actually came up with a good conduct code for journalists to do ethical reporting, and there is a section on that on social media. So I really do take your point, and if Eli wants to be part of that, we'll see.
Let us see. Let us have a show of hands. Who else would like to ask a question, and we can then perhaps group them and ask the questions, and then Ellie can respond. So we have Eric Robinson, we have the gentleman in the back, and we have this gentleman in front behind Sally, right? Oh, you already are next to you, yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's start with him, then Eric, and then at the back behind Eric.
This is not a question, but it's a comment.
And if you could introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Guy Mori Masamba. I'm from Congo, Brazzaville.
Okay.
And I'm also a member of the same organization as Tielama Miabe, National Congress for Democracy. And it is not a question, but a comment regarding the first question that was asked as to why West Africa is more dynamic in terms of social media and democracy than Central Africa. I would say you answered very well by saying that the role of civil society is very important. And I will add to that that the interaction of civil society with the international community is also very important.
Thank you.
There is an analysis that I came across some time ago that showed that the use of funding toward the civil society in Cote d'Ivoire or Burkina Faso or Senegal is very important compared to the funding going toward Congo Brazzaville, because those countries in Central Africa are more closed to the international community than the West African countries. So they receive less interaction with international community. For example, USAID doesn't have many programs in Central Africa supporting civil society in those regions. So that's just something I would add.
Thank you for that perspective. Eric Robinson, NED.
Eric Robinson, Africa program here at NED. Fascinating conversation. It's always painful to me at these that we can't spend about 3.5 hours talking about subjects like this. 2 or 3 points. I just came from a meeting on kleptocracy this morning, and I was really struck again by hearing the conversation here, how many things are weaving across one another, and the role that kleptocracy and corruption have on disenabling an independent media environment. Going to Scott's point on legal representation, that was also brought up this morning in terms of trying to push back on complex cases involving illegal financial flows. You're often going up against big international law firms being hired by international corporations, and there isn't the money to push cases in courts. That's one point. So there's a lot of crossover points between, I think, the corruption and media sector. 2, it's just on the role of inculcating a set of values, the ethical values. You talked about some of the NED programs where we're supporting organizations to push these types of values out. I mean, USAID and other people have supported lots of projects around media values. And I'm wondering, I might throw it out to the room, because I'm really bad on the social media scene and understanding it. Is there a sort of a self-learning mechanism inside it? Do you see people online calling other people out in a serious way? Is there a push internally? And I'll sort of go to your Josh, was it? What Josh said about the hate speech that's out there. I mean, you think back 30, 40, 50 years ago in this country and the kind of things people would say about other people, about minorities, about women in a party setting, in a social setting, and how slowly over time it began to evolve that, no, it's not acceptable. You can't use words like that. You can't say things like that. So how do we continue to push that set of values internally in terms of the social sphere so people are ostracized, so it's not acceptable to do that? And I think thirdly, it goes back to, again, on the issue of kleptocracy, democratic values, the issue, the importance of independent media. How do we get that into our education system, into the curriculum? I mean, this is a new concept in terms of social media. How do we begin to talking about this to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds I know we're all taught about these things in our own civic education program, but in terms of working on corruption, talking to 10, 11, 12-year-olds about accountability and personal responsibility, you're starting to see those things being woven into educational curriculum. So as you talk about this work, maybe you want to, when you talk to donors, to get support for, curriculum in schools.
Okay.
Thank you, Eric. And then the gentleman at the back.
John Rowett, the University of Oxford and Democracy Works. I wanted to pick up on the issue around youth and social media, which is being referred to on a number of occasions. And the example of Senegal was given, where obviously hip-hop activists were absolutely crucial in coming together with democracy activists. How far are you seeing that kind of interaction in the countries that you've been focusing on between young musicians and democracy activists?
One of them was actually a Reagan Fellow a couple of years ago, Chat from Senegal, one of the co-founders of Cure Guy, the band that mobilized the Yonamar movement, which I can take this opportunity to say is also featured in an upcoming article in the Journal of Democracy, the role that the band has played in mobilizing youth across the region. Okay, so why don't you respond as you see fit? Pierre, if you would like to chime in, and then we can wrap up.
Yes, like the example that came from Senegal, we have an example like that in the Republic of Congo. There is a group called Ralbol. Ralbol in Congo Brazzaville, they are using music to encourage pro-democracy activities and consciousness within the youth of Congo Brazzaville. They even sang a music that it went on Twitter, not on Twitter, on YouTube and on Facebook, because it could not be broadcast on the national television station or radio stations. Even those radio stations that are pseudo private, because in Congo, most television stations, the radio stations are owned either by the president or the family of the president. I think the only way the media of the music of the Ralbol group in Brazzaville was being broadcast was through social media, and it was also very educative. And even work in what Eric was saying, even inculcating some values, because in Africa today, most social values are being degraded, and I think they were teaching a kind of value of hard work, value of unity, and also to fight against tribalism, regionalism. I think what is happening in Senegal is really an example, mostly in French-speaking African countries.
Thank you. Pierre, would you like to say a word?
Yeah, no, just briefly, not because we work together, but Eric, you really hit it in the nail on the head, whatever the expression is.
Hit the nail on the head.
That expression. No, because, I think corruption, the role of corruption, kleptocracy, really, in this social media and media as a whole, is just overlooked. And that's something that we need to look into. We need to inculcate those values, not only in the Africans on the ground, but also in the people here that are thinking about these issues. How do we help social media or media becoming independent? We need to start having these conversations. Just kind of touching up on the point of the interaction between the young musicians and democracy activists. I do take the point, and I see the success that he had in Senegal and in other parts of Africa. But I think in Central Africa, one thing that is interesting is, the famous artists or the famous soccer players. I mean, those are the guys that really the population listens to. But then those are also the guys who are paid millions of dollars, not CFAs, to play at the parties of the son of the president or to come shake the hand of his daughter or his niece. They don't really have any ownership of even the struggle or the life of the people in those countries. It's not to say that people like Chad and others are just saints and just had more ownership of what was going on in their countries. It's very much more difficult in areas in Central Africa where once you become successful, you're co-opted, whether you are a soccer star or an artist. And it is an area that we're trying to push. It is an area that we think is important. And I thank you for raising that, actually.
Thank you, Pierre. I just want to conclude by thanking you all for coming. I want to commend you, Ellie, on the tremendous work that you are doing in shining a spotlight on the human rights violations and the restriction on free expression in Central Africa. You have paid a heavy price. Your sister, your family have paid a heavy price for the courageous work you were doing. I also want to take a moment to recognize the Committee to Protect Journalists, who not only brought you to our attention along with Pierre and Rudy from NED, but the Committee to Protect Journalists also supported you for your first 3 months in residence at NED. So we're very grateful to CPJ, very grateful to Reporters Without Borders. Marco is here, and RSF has also helped you to explore your legal options as you pursue your work in the United States. So thank you all for your support, for your interest, and thank you to Ellie and to Pierre.
Thank you very much.